boss forced me to shred harassment evidence, I played the offsite backup to the board. Welcome, dear listeners, to a place where betrayal is exposed, secrets unravel, and revenge always finds its moment. If you enjoy powerful, emotionally charged stories with unforgettable twists, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with others who love captivating storytelling. And before we begin, I'd truly love to know, where are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments section. The shredder hummed like something alive on the corner of my desk. My boss stood directly behind me, arms folded across his chest, watching every move I made. The overhead light buzzed faintly. The rest of the floor was quiet. It was just the two of us and that machine and a folder I had been holding for the past 60 seconds without moving. "Go ahead, Jacqueline," he said. His voice was low and careful, like he was talking someone through diffusing something dangerous. "We don't need those anymore." I looked down at the folder in my hands. Inside were printed complaints. 3 employees. Months of documented harassment by a senior executive. Emails they had saved. Statements from witnesses who had been brave enough to put their names on paper. Everything organized. Everything time-stamped. Everything real. My fingers tightened around the stack. Legal already reviewed it? The step he added. That was a lie. I knew it the moment he said it. Legal hadn't reviewed anything. Legal didn't even know this folder existed. I slid the first sheet into the shredder anyway. Thin white strips curled down into the bin like ribbon. My stomach dropped, but not because I thought the evidence was gone. Because my boss thought it was. And that gap between what he believed and what was actually true was about to become the most important thing in this entire building. My name is Jacqueline Mayer, and this is how I made sure the truth survived. Most people at Harlan & Voss Group barely noticed me on a good day. My official title was Compliance Coordinator and Document Retention Specialist. That sounds like something, but in a company with 400 employees and 3 floors of executives who considered themselves very important, it meant almost nothing socially. I sat in a small internal office near the end of the second-floor hallway. My door was usually open. People walked past it constantly without glancing inside. Executives ignored me in meetings. Managers talked over me when I raised process concerns. I had once spent 11 minutes explaining a retention policy violation to a VP who spent the entire time checking his phone. That invisibility had bothered me when I first started. 3 years later, I had come to understand something important about it. When people forget you exist, they also forget what you manage. They forget what systems run quietly in the background because of your work. They forget that you are the person who actually knows how every document in the company gets stored, tagged, tracked, and retained. Which made me exactly the kind of person someone like my boss would feel comfortable giving a quiet, illegal order to. Destroy these. No one will know. What he had completely forgotten, standing behind me watching those pages disappear into the shredder, was the system I had built and maintained for the past 2 years. Every document created in our internal network mirrored automatically to an off-site compliance archive. A system executives almost never thought about. A system only I managed. And a system that had already saved a copy of everything in that folder the moment it was first created. He leaned against the doorframe the entire time, watching the paper disappear strip by strip. I fed each page in slowly. Not because I was reluctant, or at least not in the way he would have read it. I was listening, watching, taking in every detail of the way he stood, the way his shoulders gradually loosened as each page was consumed, the way his expression shifted from tense supervision to quiet satisfaction. "Good," he said finally, when the last strip fell. "Let's put this whole misunderstanding behind us." Misunderstanding. 3 employees had described months of harassment by Senior Vice President Thomas Whitaker. Specific incidents, specific dates, multiple witnesses. One of the women had documented everything on her personal phone before submitting because she was afraid the company would lose it. She had been right to be afraid. And my boss was calling it a misunderstanding. He gave me a thin smile as he straightened up. "You're a smart employee, Jacqueline. Loyal." I nodded once. I kept my face completely neutral. But something shifted in my chest the moment he said that word. Loyal. Not honest. Not principled. Loyal. as if the quality he valued most in me was my willingness to do what he asked without asking why. That was when I fully understood what was happening. This wasn't just cleanup after a problem. This was a test. They were checking whether I could be trusted to help them bury it. That evening, the building cleared out floor by floor. I stayed. I told the cleaning crew I had a project deadline. I locked my office door, turned my monitor slightly away from the small window beside the door, and logged into the archival server with my administrator credentials. The off-site compliance system had been my project from the beginning. I had pitched it to the previous compliance director 18 months before he retired, built the integration myself with help from our IT vendor, and maintained it ever since. It ran quietly in the background of every document workflow in the company. Most executives knew it existed in the abstract way. They knew the building had a generator. They never thought about it specifically. 3 clicks, 1 search field. I typed the complaint folder reference number, and there it was, the complete original file. Every document, every email attachment, every witness statement, every timestamp down to the second, each file had been created or modified. The system had captured it automatically when the complaints were first submitted through our internal portal. It had mirrored every subsequent addition to the folder in real time. The shredded copies were gone, but this version was completely intact, untouched, unchanged, and protected by a legal alert system that would flag any deletion attempt and notify the board's external auditor automatically. My boss thought he had erased the evidence. What he had actually done was create a documented destruction attempt, sitting right next to a complete copy of the thing he had tried to destroy. I sat with that information for the rest of the evening and most of the night. The obvious move was to report it immediately. Call the board, contact an employment attorney, forward everything to someone with authority to act. I had the documentation, I had the archive, I had his email from that morning requesting the disposal. I had everything I needed to walk into a serious conversation the very next day. But something stopped me. I had watched how this company handled uncomfortable information before. Not through any single dramatic moment, but through dozens of small ones. A complaint that got lost between HR and legal. An investigation that somehow concluded before interviews were conducted. A senior employee who left quietly with a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, while the person who filed the complaint was quietly managed out 6 months later. Executives here protected each other instinctively, reflexively, the way people protect their own comfort. A single complaint filed by someone at my level, no matter how well documented, would be absorbed and redirected before it ever reached anyone with actual authority. I had seen it happen. No. If this was going to mean anything for the people whose names were in those files, it had to be undeniable. Not just credible, not just concerning. Undeniable. The kind of record that couldn't be absorbed or redirected or quietly settled away. So I did what I was actually trained to do. I started building a complete, irrefutable documentation trail. And I started that night. The next morning, my boss appeared at my desk at 9:17. He had a coffee in one hand and the relaxed posture of a man who believed a problem had been solved. "Everything cleaned up?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He smiled broadly. Genuinely pleased. "Good work, Jacqueline. Really." He walked away, and just like that, I became the safest person on the second floor. The quiet compliance employee who had helped the company bury something inconvenient. The loyal one. The one who could be trusted with sensitive situations. The one nobody needed to watch too carefully. That perception was going to be very useful. I spent the rest of that morning building a detailed timeline. Every email I had received or sent related to the complaints. Every calendar event where the folder had been referenced. Every access log showing who had opened the digital records and when. Every conversation I could document through notes I had started keeping in a personal encrypted file the previous evening. I was methodical about it. I organized everything by date, then by name, then by document type. I cross-referenced the complaint records against the access logs to build a clear picture of who knew what and when. And somewhere around noon, I found something I hadn't been looking for. Something that made the situation significantly larger than I had realized. The archive didn't show 3 complaints. It showed 7. I went through each one carefully, checking submission dates, employee names, and the routing history that showed how each complaint had moved through the system after submission. 3 of them had been routed to me through the standard compliance intake process. Those were the ones I had been asked to shred. I knew those. But 4 others, submitted over the previous 14 months, had been quietly rerouted before they ever reached my desk. They had been sent directly to HR through a secondary routing path that bypassed compliance entirely. Each one had been marked resolved and closed within 2 weeks of submission. No investigation notes. No interview records. No outcome documentation beyond a single-line notation that said matter addressed. Every single one of them mentioned the same executive. Thomas Whitaker. Whitaker ran 2 of the company's largest revenue-generating divisions. His budget alone represented nearly a third of annual company income. He had been with the organization for 11 years. He was on the company's leadership award wall in the main lobby. He played golf with 3 of the 5 board members. He was, in every practical sense, untouchable. Or at least everyone had believed he was. But every one of those 7 complaints had passed through systems that I managed, which meant every one of them had left a record that still existed. And that record was about to matter enormously. About 2 weeks after the shredding, I crossed paths with one of the employees who had filed a complaint. Her name was Megan Caldwell. She worked in project coordination on the 3rd floor. I had seen her in the building regularly, but we had never spoken beyond the occasional hallway nod. She was in the break room when I walked in just after 11, standing near the coffee station looking like someone who had been tired for a very long time. She noticed my badge lanyard. "You work in compliance, right?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, like she was testing whether the question itself was safe. I confirmed that I did. She hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at me. Then she asked in an even quieter voice whether anything had ever happened with her report. My chest tightened. I thought carefully before answering. I couldn't tell her what I knew. Not yet. Not without risking the entire documentation effort I was still building. But I also couldn't dismiss her with a vague non-answer and watch the last bit of hope leave her face. I told her as clearly as I could without crossing any lines that everything submitted through the compliance system remained on record. Her shoulders dropped. The relief on her face was immediate and complete. And that moment confirmed something I had already been feeling, but hadn't fully named yet. People were waiting. They just needed one person in this building to actually take it seriously. The email arrived on a Thursday morning, 3 months after the shredding. The subject line read, "Internal Governance Audit, All Departments." It was from the board's office. The full board had requested a formal internal audit covering the past 24 months of company operations, including HR processes, compliance functions, and executive conduct protocols. An external audit committee had been engaged. Department leads were to provide full cooperation. Document requests would follow. I read it twice, then I read it a 3rd time. My heart was beating faster than usual, but I kept my expression completely neutral because 3 colleagues had desks within visible range of mine, and I didn't want anyone reading my face. Across the office, I could already see the reactions spreading. Executives gathered in small clusters in the hallway. Someone from legal appeared on the 2nd floor, looking like they hadn't expected to be there that morning. My boss's office door, which was usually open, clicked shut. Audits created a very specific kind of panic in organizations that had been operating with the assumption that oversight was theoretical. The panic wasn't about finding errors. It was about data verification. And data verification meant someone was finally going to compare what the official record said against what the actual record showed. I noticed the shift in email traffic before anything else changed visibly. Executives who rarely sent internal messages were suddenly requesting document histories from their assistants. HR began asking compliance for archived correspondence going back 18 months. Someone from the legal team submitted 3 separate record requests in a single afternoon, all flagged urgent. The building felt like a room where someone had just turned a light on, and everyone was squinting. On the 2nd day after the audit announcement, my boss called me into his office. He gestured for me to sit. He closed the door behind me, which he almost never did. "Joe Cloney," he began, his tone carefully measured, like he was choosing each word the way you choose footing on ice. "About those complaint files from earlier this year." I waited. "Do you have any remaining records?" he asked. "Anything we should be aware of?" I met his eyes without blinking. "The paper copies were shredded," I said. "As you requested." The tension in his shoulders released almost immediately. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've just confirmed something they were almost sure about. "Right," he said. "Good." He thought the trail ended at the shredder. He thought I was the wall between the past and the audit. He had no idea I was the door. The formal document request came from the audit committee 2 days later. It arrived as an official memo addressed to the compliance department, signed by the board's appointed external legal counsel. It requested all records related to employee complaints, harassment reports, and conduct investigations filed during the previous 24 months. Everything. Original submissions, routing logs, investigation notes, resolution documentation, all of it by end of business Friday. My boss appeared at my desk within 20 minutes of the memo circulating. He was moving quickly. Not running, but close. "We'll prepare a clean summary report," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'll work with HR to pull the relevant files and we can present a consolidated overview." Clean. That was the word he used. Clean meaning incomplete. Clean meaning curated. Clean meaning we show them the 3 cases we can explain and hope they don't ask about the 4 we buried and the evidence we shredded. He looked at me like this was a reasonable plan. Like we were collaborators in something normal. I nodded and said I would support whatever report structure he put together. What I didn't tell him was that the board's formal document request had just given me something I had been carefully waiting for. Authorization. An official legal request for those records meant I was now obligated, not just permitted, to produce everything the archive held. He had just handed me the key to the door he thought was locked. That evening, I accessed the off-site archival server for the 2nd time since the shredding. I logged in with my administrator credentials, opened the compliance records section, and pulled up the full folder I had verified months earlier. 7 complaint files, all time-stamped, all complete, all mirrored automatically by the system at the moment of original submission, before anyone had the chance to reroute, modify, or discard anything. I opened each file individually and reviewed it against the board's request criteria. Every single one qualified. Every single one was within the 24-month window. Every single one had been filed through official company channels and captured by the archive system exactly as required by our records retention policy, a policy I had written, submitted, and received board approval for 18 months ago. I began compiling everything into a formal compliance packet, formatted according to board submission standards. But I didn't finalize it yet. I had one more piece I needed to include, one piece that would change the nature of the packet entirely, transforming it from a record of harassment complaints into something much more significant. Proof that someone had attempted to destroy this evidence intentionally. Without that piece, the packet showed wrongdoing by one executive. With it, the packet showed a cover-up involving multiple people in leadership. I needed to find exactly the right document to make that case airtight. I searched my work inbox that night with the focused patience of someone who already knew what they were looking for. The search took less than 4 minutes. There it was, sitting in my inbox from the morning of the shredding, time-stamped at 8:52, sent from my boss's work email address to mine with no other recipients and no subject line. The body of the email contained 11 words. Please dispose of the complaint file in the retention queue. No need to retain. Corporate language. Deliberately vague, carefully indirect. The kind of language people use when they want to give an order that they can later describe as ambiguous if anyone asks. But in the context of the full record I had assembled, it wasn't ambiguous at all. It was an instruction to destroy active complaint evidence during a period when those complaints were still unresolved. And when combined with the archive showing the documents had existed and been captured before that email was sent, it created a clear and provable sequence. He had ordered the destruction. I had executed the destruction of the paper copies. But the digital record had survived, automatically by design, and now carried the destruction order as an attachment. I added the email to the compliance packet. The record no longer showed only harassment. It showed harassment followed by deliberate suppression. And that distinction, legally and professionally, was the difference between a serious problem and a catastrophic one. A calendar invitation arrived in my inbox the following morning at 8:34. Audit Committee Review. Boardroom A, Thursday 10 a.m. Attendees included the 5 board members, the external legal counsel from the Audit Committee, 3 senior executives including Whitaker himself, my boss, and me. My name was listed under Supporting Personnel Compliance Records. I was there to bring documents. In their version of this meeting, I was the administrative support, the quiet background person who carried the folder in, placed it on the table, and sat along the wall while the important people talked. They had invited me because they needed someone to hand over the clean summary my boss had prepared. The version with 3 cases and tidy resolution notes and no mention of anything else. My boss stopped by my desk that afternoon. He looked more composed than he had in days, which told me he believed the situation was manageable. Thursday is straightforward, he said. Just bring the compliance summary we discussed. Answer questions simply. Refer anything complex to me. I told him that sounded fine. I went home that evening and reviewed the full compliance packet one more time. All 7 files, all routing histories, all timestamps, the destruction order email, the archive metadata showing the records had been captured before and survived after the shredding, the board's formal request memo authorizing the disclosure. I saved the complete packet to an encrypted portable drive. Then I went to sleep, which surprised me. I had expected not to be able to. Boardroom A was on the 4th floor, directly above the executive suite. I had been in it twice before for unrelated compliance training sessions, but it felt different on Thursday morning. The long oval table was fully occupied, 5 board members down one side, external legal counsel at the far end, 3 senior executives, including Whitaker, arranged along the opposite side. My boss sat close to Whitaker, positioned slightly behind him in the way people position themselves when they want proximity to power. I took a seat along the side wall near the credenza, which was where support staff typically sat during these sessions. The room was quiet, in the particular way rooms get when everyone in them is aware that something significant is about to happen, but no one is certain exactly what shape it will take. The board's chairwoman spoke first. Her name was Dr. Adawara Namdi. She had been on the board for 6 years. She had a reputation for asking questions that sounded simple and weren't. We'll begin with the compliance records, she said. Miss Mayer, you've brought the department documentation? I stood up. Yes, I said. I placed the summary packet my boss had prepared on the table in front of the nearest board member. Then I didn't sit down, because what came next mattered more than anything I had done to prepare for it. One of the board members, a man named Arthur Pelham, who had a background in corporate law, flipped through the summary packet with the quiet efficiency of someone who had reviewed a lot of documents and could tell when something was missing. He got to the end, looked up, and said, "Strange. This shows only 3 complaints over 24 months." The room stayed still. Whitaker, who had been sitting with the relaxed posture of a man who believed the meeting was a formality, leaned back slightly and folded his hands. "Unfortunate misunderstandings," he said. His tone was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone who had used that phrase before and had it received well. Each one was reviewed and handled appropriately. My boss nodded immediately beside him. "That's correct. We took each one seriously." Handled. Seriously. 2 more words that meant nothing and implied everything. I was still standing near the credenza. I opened my laptop, which I had placed on the surface beside me before the meeting started. My boss glanced at me then, not alarmed exactly, but noticing. His eyes lingered for just a second longer than they would have if everything was fine. I kept my expression completely still, because that word, handled, was the one that changed what I was about to do from optional to necessary. "I'd like to clarify something for the record," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. The room shifted. Several board members looked up from the packet. Whitaker's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. My boss opened his mouth. "The paper copies of the complaint files were shredded earlier this year," I said before he could speak. A few people looked at each other. Arthur Pelham set down his pen. "However," I continued, "our compliance department operates an off-site digital archival system. It mirrors all records created in the internal network automatically at the time of submission. Those records cannot be deleted without triggering a legal notification to the board's external auditor." The room was completely silent. I turned the laptop so the screen faced the table. "I've compiled the full archive response to the board's formal document request," I said. "With your permission, I'll display it now." Dr. Namdi looked at me for a moment. Then she said, simply, "Please proceed." I pressed the display key, and I watched the room's entire atmosphere change in the space of approximately 4 seconds. 7 complaint files appeared on the screen, each one labeled with a case reference number, a submission date, and an employee name, each one with its full documentation visible in the preview pane. Emails, formal reports, witness statements, medical leave records in 2 cases that corroborated the reported incidents, archive metadata showing exactly when each document had been captured by the system and confirming that none of them had been altered since submission. The room was completely silent. Whitaker leaned forward. His jaw was tight. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "Those files were." He stopped himself. But the sentence had already begun. Several board members had heard it. Arthur Pelham wrote something on his notepad. I scrolled to the final document in the packet. My boss's email appeared on screen. Full size, full text, time-stamped, his name in the sender field. "Please dispose of the complaint file in the retention queue. No need to retain." Dr. Namdi looked at it for a long moment. Then she slowly folded her hands on the table and turned toward the executive side of the room. "Mr. Whitaker," she said. Her voice was precise and completely calm. "I think we need to hear your account of these 7 complaints, beginning with the earliest one." Whitaker started talking. He used the word miscommunication 4 times in the first 2 minutes. He said there had been clerical errors in the routing system. He said the HR process had been followed correctly to the best of his knowledge. He said some of the complaints had involved personal dynamics that were genuinely complex and required careful handling. The board listened. Legal counsel took notes. Then Arthur Pelham asked the audit team to pull the server-side routing logs for each complaint. That request landed differently than anything else had in the meeting. Because the routing logs didn't just show where the complaints had ended up. They showed every point at which a document had been touched, redirected, or modified, and by which user account. 4 complaints had been manually rerouted from the standard compliance intake path to a secondary HR queue. The rerouting had been done by a single user account. The account belonged to my boss. His face, when the log appeared on screen, went a color I don't have an accurate word for. Whitaker went completely still, because the investigation had just pivoted. It was no longer a conversation about whether harassment had occurred. It was now a documented record of a coordinated suppression effort, and both of them had just become central to it. Legal counsel asked the question that changed the rest of the meeting entirely. Who authorized the document destruction? The words landed in the silence like something dropped on a hard floor. My boss looked at the table. Whitaker looked at my boss. That look lasted less than 2 seconds. But I caught it. Arthur Pelham caught it. Dr. Namdi caught it. It was the look of a man deciding very quickly that his own position mattered more than protecting the person beside him. Whitaker had spent 11 years at the top of this organization by understanding exactly when to step away from a problem and let someone else carry the weight of it. He had always been protected by the institutional loyalty of people below him. People who believed that loyalty ran both directions. My boss was about to discover that it didn't. In the space of that single glance, Whitaker had made his calculation, and my boss, who had ordered the shredding, who had sent the email, who had managed the rerouting of 4 complaints through his own login credentials, had just been designated the person responsible for all of it. I had watched this organization absorb problems before. This time, the problem was too documented to absorb, and the people it was going to consume were the ones who had created it. Legal counsel read the disposal email aloud, word by word, slowly, with the careful enunciation of someone making sure every person in the room absorbed every syllable. When he finished, my boss's voice cracked almost immediately. "That wasn't what I intended by that," he said. "The context of that message was different from how it reads out of." "The timestamp is March 14th, Arthur Pelham said. He was looking at his notepad. "The board audit was not announced until June. This email was sent while complaints were still active and unresolved." My boss stopped talking. The chairwoman closed the summary folder. "Disposing of active complaint evidence before resolution is a serious compliance violation," Dr. Namdi said. Her voice hadn't raised even slightly. It didn't need to. "Ordering that disposal through written communication makes the intent a matter of record." Nobody spoke. I sat along the side wall with my hands folded in my lap and watched the moment land across the faces of every person in that room. Outside the large boardroom windows, the city was doing what it always did. Traffic moving, clouds shifting, the ordinary world continuing at normal speed, while something significant collapsed in a room on the 4th floor. The ordinary world had no idea, but the record did. Whitaker was escorted from the boardroom first. 2 members of the external legal team accompanied him. No dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, just a quiet request to step out, and then the sound of his footsteps crossing the hallway and the elevator arriving. My boss followed approximately 8 minutes later. He walked past my chair on his way to the door. He didn't look at me. I didn't look away from him. Both were placed on immediate administrative leave, pending the outcome of the formal investigation. The room felt different once they were gone. Not lighter exactly. More accurate, like the air had stopped holding a shape it was never meant to hold. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had said very little during the meeting itself, looked over at me from across the table. "Miss Mayer," she said carefully, "thank you for ensuring the records were preserved and properly submitted." I nodded once. "It's what the retention policy requires," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer than the answer needed, the way people do when they recognize that something plain and factual is also carrying a lot of weight underneath it. Compliance work is invisible in organizations until the moment it becomes the only thing that matters. This had been that moment. The formal investigation ran for 11 weeks. The External Audit Committee expanded its scope within the first 2 weeks after the boardroom meeting. The server logs, the routing records, and the complete archive I had submitted gave investigators a detailed map of what had happened and when. More employees came forward once it became clear that the complaints were being taken seriously by people with actual authority to act. Several people who had heard things, seen things, or been discouraged from reporting things over the previous 2 years provided statements. The picture that emerged was thorough and specific. Whitaker submitted his resignation before his termination could be formally processed. My boss was terminated with cause approximately 3 weeks into the investigation. 2 HR employees who had been involved in the complaint rerouting received formal disciplinary action. The company's External Employment Council recommended a complete overhaul of the complaint intake process and commissioned an independent review of all HR decisions made over the previous 36 months. The complaint system was temporarily suspended and then relaunched with a redesigned process that separated intake from any management influence and routed everything directly to an independent compliance function. For the first time in years, according to what I heard from multiple people on different floors, employees actually believed that filing a report might accomplish something. That shift mattered more to me than anything else that came out of those 11 weeks. About a month after the investigation concluded, I received a calendar invitation from Dr. Namdi's office. No subject line, just her name and a time and the boardroom number. I arrived early. She was already there, seated at the head of the table with a leather folder open in front of her. 2 other board members were present, including Arthur Pelham. There was a single additional folder at the seat across from hers. She greeted me, asked me to sit, and then slid the folder across the table. Director of Corporate Compliance was printed at the top of the first page. I looked at the title, then at the reporting structure, which showed the position reporting directly to the board's audit committee rather than through any management chain. Then, at the scope of responsibilities, which included independent oversight of all complaint systems, records retention, and regulatory compliance across all departments. Dr. Namdi said, "We need someone running this function who actually understands what integrity looks like in practice." Arthur Pelham added, "Someone who knows what to do when following the policy is the harder choice." My hands were completely still in my lap. 6 months before that morning, I had been the person nobody thought about twice, the compliance coordinator at the end of the hallway. The one who got quiet orders because powerful people assumed quiet meant compliant. They had been wrong about what quiet meant. And this conversation was the proof. The old shredder was still in the compliance office when I moved into the director role. Same machine, same gray plastic housing, same humming motor that started with a low vibration before it caught full speed. Nobody had thought to replace it. It just sat there on the corner credenza, the way furniture does when an organization assumes it will always serve the same purpose. I left it there on purpose. Not as a symbol of anger. Not as a reminder of the specific day my boss stood behind me, watching paper disappear into the bin like he was watching a problem dissolve. I left it there because of what it actually represented now. The gap between what powerful people believe they have destroyed and what actually survives. The shredder consumed paper. It always had. But the paper was never the real record. Not in an organization with a functioning archive system. Not in a world where digital records timestamp themselves the moment they're created and mirror automatically to locations that exist outside anyone's reach. People in positions of power often make the same mistake. They confuse physical destruction with truth destruction. They confuse ordering something done with it actually being done. They confuse the silence of a compliant employee with the absence of a record. The truth about organizations is not complicated once you understand it clearly. Powerful people believe silence protects them. Records are indifferent to power. They don't care who ordered what. They don't care who the important people are or how long they've been important. They simply store what happened and wait. And sometimes the quietest person in the building is the one who has been patiently, carefully holding every piece of the truth together until the right moment arrives to place it on the table. That was all I had done. And it had been more than enough.